Greetings. It's about 1:30 in the afternoon of Monday, September 15th, 2025. And I just thought while I had a minute, been watching a lot of stuff, but I thought I'd take a minute to say this a little bit troubling, almost annoying, to see the malarkey that I saw, according to a oversight committee in Congress having something to do with some part of the space program and foreign policy and whatever, defense, whatever. And they misconstrued the whole thing about hegemony and the moon and orbital mechanics and one thing or another. And they were hitting hard on the need for the U.S. to dominate the moon, lest anybody else get there for anything. And it was heavy-handed and so on, and said we have to have the unrestricted freedom to land on the moon anywhere we want with whatever we want to take with us. And they were quick to say what we need is nuclear power on the moon, and we need to see about extraction of stuff from the moon. All kinds of stuff, you know, passé really. The issue of policing the moon is thankless and pointless. The problem about landing on the moon can be handled by a nice committee of the UN that can give sanctions to any nation, proven to have landed on the moon. Because categorically, there's no reason really, aside from research, for anything to be landed there. And for example, if you want seismic results, maybe it's cheaper to land something on the moon. But this business of putting nuclear power plants or excavators and bulldozers and to blast off from the moon in a big rocket filled with something. All of that's beside the point. The only things that might be useful in terms of landing on the moon would be, like I say, if somebody really has a legitimate interest in seismic signals, maybe even triangulating something and this, that, and the other. A lot of that could be done from low moon orbit, but even more can be done and cheaply or more cheaply with something that lands and not something that just makes the moon into a garbage dump. It's sort of like candid pictures taken by some climbers, the pathway to the top of Mount Everest. It looks like a garbage dump, the whole pathway. I've heard they're going to try to clean it up. I don't know whether they will, but anyway, people are not made privy to that for some reason. They ought to be made privy to that. It's an outrage. The difficulty with the moon is, or even not near orbit or flyby or anything, is that nowadays we have learned, haven't we, that you can have Laurel and Hardy with Khrushchev and Kennedy, or you can have cheeseburgers in North Korea. You can have any story you want about the moon. Who's going to go there to find out what's happening? I just wouldn't want to go down that path, in so many ways. On the other hand, I think people should be given enough to know or to understand why something has to be invested in to keep the moon what it should be, even though in practical terms things could be done to try to rule out what I've referred to as the results of hegemony. Things could be done to cut down on what I expect, but it's not practical any more than on Earth trying to take up all the arms spread out all over the Earth. But what hegemony means in terms of orbital mechanics, I'll just stop there. There are plenty of people who know it's very convenient that the moon is there, because there are a lot of things that can be done in terms of orbital mechanics, in terms of what is possible or not possible on Earth. And the idea of putting a nuclear plant up there, let's hope we do better than that. Now then, I don't know, they didn't, it's maybe might be a bunch of poker players not wanting to talk about the real imperatives that are underway now in terms of development. But I was watching just one thing after another about quantum this and quantum that, and there's so much stuff going around. That doesn't change. That doesn't change some of the basics about any of that. I even have watched a bunch of people saying, well, it looks like, amazingly enough, the shill from Princeton is going to be branded mistaken about, what do you call it, spooky reality or something, I've forgotten. Anyway, he made no provision specifically for what people are talking about, and then he talked about, his biggest mistake was a caveat that he didn't include in terms of his notations. But so much is nebulous that to say that he was wrong is fine. If people want to explain what they mean by saying that for some reason Einstein was wrong about something, that's fine. I think I know what they're talking about. I'm not myself in any position to argue about that. That's for other people that, oh golly. But it does seem that a case can be made that he never set out to explain the spooky business that they characterize as something that he detested, that he didn't like it, he didn't want to talk about it, and so on. I don't know. I'm skeptical about that, but maybe in the long run, to have a shill turn out to be infallible is kind of old-fashioned. We're going to do something about Elon Musk the same way. Right now, bless their hearts, there are people lionizing Charlie Kirk, who believed in freedom of expression and good debate and honest dealings with one another. There are a lot of people who look up to him already, and they need to have even more look up to him and respect what he struggled for his whole life. And to be lionized is good. People have done that for generations in terms of Einstein, or even some of the people now who allegedly had a better idea than he did about this entanglement business and so on. I have the impression he just didn't like the debate. So like there are people today who say, "Oh, I'm not going to pay any attention to string theory. I just don't like string theory." Well, okay. It's strange how people just sometimes they just don't want to deal with something, and it could very well be that Einstein was dismissive of the arguments. I know that by definition, the quagmire that even then was described is how do you deal with something that avoids measurement to the extent that they understood the problems that people have talked about now. He just didn't want to, because of that, I think he just said, I don't want to, he thought it was a waste of his time, more than that he specifically said, okay, you guys, you're dead wrong about this, that, and the other. He never said that, and it's fine with me if Niels is thought to have done better than Albert on something like that. But I think, he, before he died, Albert said that he knew there was more to be understood than what he had written about. And, when he said, I don't want to write about something, that might not be a sign that he was wrong about some ideas about things that then were understood by definition to be nebulous. But I don't think you would find that he could not have written a letter about orbital mechanics in light of today's technology as being really, you might say, not so much a frontier about ballistics and related developments as it is about, some very rigorous control ideas. We have gotten to the point, as people know, we put things in orbit. We've sent things in flyby maneuvers into all kinds of areas. We can put things in orbit around the moon. We can bring things back from the moon. We do all kinds of things with what essentially is ballistics. After all, that's because the burning of fuel is not done the same way as some imagine in an airplane, for example. There are changes in course and one thing or another that are done with fuel, but basically it's kind of a ballistics. We know all that, but it's what we put in orbit, or what we put in this or that or the other orbit, or what we take out of orbit, and how, what we do with things that are in orbit, and all of that's not just a matter of taking a few pictures, although that's gotten to be very amazing. There are things that can be done in orbit, for example, that are better done in orbit than by landing on the moon. There's certain things that are definitely better, like seismic measurements, or long-term temperature measurements at the same time, and so on, a modest intrusion into a pristine environment. But most of that can be done just as well in orbit, even if it costs a little bit more. And that might be a new standard that people can adopt. I would say at the UN. But Albert would certainly be able to write a letter if he were on top of his game the way he was about the atom bomb and, you know, things like that. He could write a letter, not to FDR now, but to whomever's president, and say, you know, you need to think in these terms as, you know, a good idea to have underway so that we can take care of the moon, along with, you know, cooperating with others, so that if people start sending things to the moon, we can notice that and sanction them for it. It should not be allowed unless approved by, you know, a scientific body. And no one really needs to put extractive stuff on the moon or try to build a shanty town on the moon, complete with a nuclear generator, power generator. It just wouldn't be the thing to do, you know. Now some say, well, we need to practice by building a place to live on the moon, because that's the only way we'll get to Mars a few years later. Well, right now we're not ready for that, you know. I mean, if you took all your CAD/CAM information, thought, you know, if you thought any of it would work, you could test it on Earth and see whether it would work in large measure. Not everything, because, you know, weight saving for the moon means that things would be built very differently than to survive on Earth. But anyway, there's a hell of a lot that can be done without landing anything on the moon, and there are reasons not to do that. One of the reasons not to be landing things on the moon is that if the hegemony is established in orbit, then the moon can be kept safe, and if not, the degradation of having, you know, arms on the moon rather than in orbit is just terrible. In orbit, you can fight your little battles about what's in orbit, and for reasons that, you know, are technical and that don't have anything to do with nuclear arms or something that are found somewhere else. There's no reason to think in terms of any of those things on the surface of the moon. People might think, well, you're just talking about having sort of like, what is it, Sputnik, just going around the moon, and you'd push a button and it would send a signal to do so. Well, in a way, yeah, but what can go around the Earth, around the moon and the Earth and beyond are machinery, is machinery that can have a lot to do with what happens on Earth. Also, there's a problem of, you know, the mad world thing about, you know, mutual assured destruction. All of that changes in terms of orbital mechanics. A lot of things have problems on Earth because of the intervals involved between events, and those can be solved in large measure with the simplest interpretation of orbital mechanics. Beyond that, there are things to do with the integrity of data that involve all of that, and what can be involved with the orbital mechanics thing is that the cost of entry into a more powerful scenario for someone who has paid the cost of entry into a more powerful environment for somebody is so high that you would not find, say, for example, some weak power trying to do the same thing that the U.S. could easily afford. It's sort of like in business on Earth, you know, if you want to start a brand new widget manufacturing and sales organization, you have to look at, you know, the cost of entering into a market that some other company already has nailed down, you know. And you have to take into account that you have to withstand the competition of a company that is, already selling 80% of a given market. Well, if the U.S. has what I'm talking about, it is a new paradigm on several levels. I've mentioned two. There's some others, but the cost of doing that means nobody else is going to try to do it. You know, and it wouldn't make much sense to try to compete with what we're talking about. It would be about like saying, well, you know, those awful communists are going to regroup and they're going to come to America and try to build a parallel highway system and get everybody to drive on their roads or something. Well, that just wouldn't, you know, that doesn't make any sense. So, but, you know, now there is one thing that I would do, and that is, without any problem, if a solar-powered beacon, several maybe, are around the equator of the moon, or maybe, you know, different longitudes and latitudes, whatever the technical stuff would be, something that would help make GPS work with more accuracy. But, you know, so if satellites refer to a known spot relative to the surface, so much so that, you know, the measurements that were taken would show, my gosh, what a big difference from one day to the next, because of what we already know about the interior of the moon and gravity and the solar system and so on. But there's so much that can be done in terms of the metrics that if the U.S. gets a letter from somebody, I don't know, what, Caltech or MIT, or from where would a letter come, you know, into someplace saying, you know, don't try to build a log cabin with a nuclear power plant on the moon. Not even a hot tin. And that's something else too. People talk about, well, you know, people want to land and jump up and down and drive a car on the moon and play golf on the moon. Oh, that was really hot shit, wasn't it? It's true. What I'm talking about is equipment that is essentially robotic. There'd be no reason to have people messing with the kind of machinery I'm talking about. And of course, everything I'm talking about has self-destruct stuff, theoretically, to throw things off into space when something has failed. With big telescope years ago, they sent astronauts to fix a stupid mistake in terms of the optics. I don't think we have to do that with the kind of machinery that can be made now. It's expensive to think of, replacing something, but hell, we do it all the time already without even talking about it. So it isn't necessary to do that. But that's quite a thing if you think about having to fix that telescope because of a stupid mistake. We're liable to have that unless we do a lot better. Who knows? There may be some who come up with a plan for nuclear energy planted on the moon. That'll be, sad day. Of course, none of this is going to happen when I'm around anyway, Well, I'm thinking, what I'm talking about probably won't even be initiated in a way that I would know about, Some things are already done. They've already got feasibility stuff worked out. I don't know whether anybody has actually launched any equipment. That's not the kind of thing I would know. I know feasibility stuff has been done for that. I don't know what's been done in terms of, a hot tent for the moon. Maybe somebody has a budget for that. I don't think it's worth it because there are other things that must be done. If people want to keep the U.S. in the forefront, then we ought to be very magnanimous and so on about a concerted effort to do certain things, taking into account hegemony, because if we don't, somebody else will. And I don't think people really are saying, how can we get there first? I don't think anybody really. People recognize that the U.S. can do that and ought to do that in the same way that in the U.S. Nobody seriously says, oh, why don't we build a toll road from here to there? Well, of course, the politics about where to build a road all the time. And we have too many, by the way, in the sense that, we ought to have light rail. But anyway, another, to put things in perspective, that's a worse problem than worrying about nuclear energy on the moon, although that would be a nasty thing to do, really, vulgar, nasty experiment or achievement. What would you do? I know what you could do. I think of it this way. Somebody wants to do research on the moon before going to Mars by putting a hot tent there and a nuclear plant there and charge up a Tesla car, lunar model XYZ. For what? Well, I guess that'd be better than trying to build a light rail on the moon if not on the Earth. Anyway, I won't know about any of it. I don't think anybody's going to do enough, for me to turn on my little tablet and find out what rich people are doing, about the moon. And I don't think there'll ever be chapter and verse about, the technicalities about hegemony around the moon and how the U.S. could establish the whole idea and then nobody else would really find it economically reasonable. to compete, you know. If it's done correctly, it will really obviate things that would be alternatives if there might be a rough and tumble business of landing everything you can think of on the surface or in orbit, and a very crude system or no system to coordinate any number of things. So yeah, I object to what seems to be the prevailing idea according to the Oversight Committee, and I would call them somewhat some persons unknown to write to the White House and say, you know, there's some people who want to put an electric car on the moon with a nuclear power plant or something, or what, maybe a solar array to heat water and make steam and generate electricity, to charge a battery in a Tesla car on the moon. I just, you know, I hope not. But I could write, I would have, you know, somebody write a letter to the White House and say, please don't do that. Instead, think about, you know, and then I would set out some of the implications of our digital world, and I think it would go over. It would be the kind of thing that people would be reading about with their first coffee every day. But I think to the extent people became informed, they would understand that what would it cost? Maybe a dime per month per citizen to do the whole thing? I don't know. That's somebody else's business. 32 minutes and counting, more than enough. I think some would say way too much on this, and then I'm going to bed soon.